Did you see Arby's bought Buffalo Wild Wings?
It's weird.
Yeah, they're like a duopoly.
I saw that duopoly of diarrhea. I was like, yeah, poo jokes. That was awesome.
I think we have a cold open. Hey, this is Dennis, and welcome to another episode of the Ground to Reason podcast, where Joel and I are probably just going to talk about net neutrality today.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty well steeped in the news right now.
Yep, and that's because Ajit Pai, who, oh, by the way, we have to be careful with the name calling because he is using it, well... And to be fair, we've only rattled off terms like, I think douche canoe was one.
Yep.
What else did we say?
Well, I know I called him a motherfucker.
We've used that before. But the problem is there's these, especially, I guess it's Trump's America, racists just feel like, I can just be racist now. So they're like, saying shit to him on Twitter that's like pretty bad because I mean he's an Indian dude, so they're going after that, and it's fucking horrid and terrible.
Yeah, it's really terrible.
But here's the what I'm saying is if you're going to go out there and do that, it's just kind of it just weakens the pro net neutrality case. Well, because they just grab onto it and then that's all they talk about. There's like his chief of staff never really comments on anything that's said to him, but if he can find one of these stupid racist assholes, he will like retweet it and hold it up and it's like, oh look, like everyone who's for pro net neutrality is one of those guys.
Pretty confident we had like a whole outro on like, you know, how big an asshole all of these, you know, faux Nazi jackasses are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like I don't want to give them like, any more firepower, so I'm just going to stay away from any type of like. So
you're telling me I can't call him all the names I want to call?
No, like you can't. We can't have nice things, Joel, because racists are going to they fuck it up. We can't have nice things.
You white supremacists have ruined another Thanksgiving.
But so anyway, getting back to it, net neutrality is pretty much I'm going to call it. I know it's early. I'm making the early call. It's dead. Because
I actually think that's a completely legitimate call at this point.
Yeah, because on the 14th, that's what they announced. He's going to pretty much attempt to vote on his plan on the 14th.
Yeah.
Of December,
I mean,
which is in
so
like
brazen
a week and a half, 2 weeks.
To at this point, when I mean, Dennis, you tell me what the comment count was, but I think it was somewhere right around.
I'm going to go into that because that's a big part of this. But for new people joining us, real quick, net neutrality is basically saying that all content on the internet is supposed to be treated equally, and you can't block or throttle or give priority to one type of content in favor of another. Yep. For instance, you know, let's say I'm, you know, a big ISP with a top hat and monocle and like swimming in my Scrooge McDuck vat of gold.
Money bin.
Then and say I own, you know, some video service. I can't degrade every other competitor's video service in favor of mine.
Right. Like
because that net neutrality proactively stops me from doing that. It's against the rules.
And I think what's an important thing, and we can get more into this when we go into like refuting the argument that Mr. Pai has made thus far. I'm putting my adult hat back on.
Right.
All right. Mr. Pai has made basically the argument that the regulations that have been put in place by the FCC to ensure net neutrality are anti-competitive when they are actually very, very pro-free market.
Very.
In the sense that if you look at like the Sherman Antitrust Act and deregulation of the railroads in the 1870s and 80s, or the same thing that was done with the deregulating of the airlines in the late 70s and early 80s, is pro-market. Basically, what you're doing is taking monopolist power, in this case of the ISPs, and breaking it up through the only means that the public has, which is through a federal regulator, right? So you're actually encouraging more competition by saying, hey, you internet service providers cannot both control the access to the internet and the content speed, or the speed of the content that is displayed on the internet.
Well, yeah, it's because what happens is if you have, I mean, let's be honest, there's about 5 companies in this country where most people get their internet from.
Sure.
I mean,
it's a big dropout off after 3.
Yes,
right?
It really is. So
it's Comcast, Verizon, Charter are the big 3, right?
Now, my thoughts are people get the internet because there's cool shit on the internet.
Yeah.
If there wasn't cool shit on the internet, no one would purchase internet. Right. And that's what Pi misses. It's the content providers. It's the app makers. It's the inventors of services that really make the money for the ISPs.
Yeah, that drive the innovation in the industry.
Right. Because if there's nothing cool to go look at on the internet,
right,
why is anyone going to go and subscribe to internet? So it drives demand for the ISP services.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have a right to pick the winners and losers in the content game.
Well, see previous episodes to get like the expanded version of these rants. But like one of the things we talked about was this. Bear in mind, like another argument that will be made by the ISPs or Mr. Pi is that it's their infrastructure. They've invested in it. They should be able to charge differentiated pricing, at whatever levels they see fit to recoup those costs. And that seems reasonable on its surface.
Well, we're already paying for it.
Right. Well, we're already paying for it.
And the edge provider, and I hate the word edge provider because it's kind of like a bullshit way of looking at the internet. Because really, it's nothing but
they're the provider.
Well, they're the ISP, but an edge provider, like they call it like Netflix, an edge provider. I think that's bullshit. That's not how the internet works. Netflix is a user. I'm a user. We have a conversation or a communication over that wire.
Right.
That's really what it is. It's like it's a bunch of users. Now, some users put out content, others consume content, some do both. But really, the edge provider thing kind of confuses.
I agree.
The way the internet works.
But I think the argument doesn't even need to make it that far for it to be delegitimized, because what the argument of like, it's their infrastructure, they've paid for it and so on, for the ISPs have paid for it, etc. Like what it forgets is that our federal tax dollars went into creating the internet.
Well, yes,
right?
The internet was invented by the U.S. Well, it was invented by the people, but I mean, it was a government-funded project.
Right. Like, it was invented by many different entities, but without ARPANET as a major funder of all of that research.
What was ARPANET and universities?
Right.
Many of them were state universities.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And then on top of that, all throughout the 90s, whenever extra fiber, well, that's more like the 2000s, but extra copper just showed up, right? Like in the Federal Registry, it was given to the ISPs with sweetheart deals.
Yep.
Right? Like, and I got no problem with that. My problem only comes in when the ISPs then say, hey, we're not a utility. Right? Like, and it's why I've been arguing for a long time that what they really should do is split those companies in half and take their ISP portion and run it like a public utility.
Yes.
And take their content provider portion.
That's why they're fighting this tooth and nail.
Of course they are.
Because they're afraid that a little bit in the weeds here, but net neutrality, as it pertains to the internet, has been around since... I mean, well, the concept of net neutrality honestly starts with
back to
1860.
yeah.
Well, yes, when it comes to network neutrality, I know when people are like 1860, what? But really it does because
it goes back to the telegraph.
Exactly. Every communications device that we've had in this country has adhered to a principle of net neutrality, meaning that all, messages sent over the network, like one will not have priority over the other. And there's been stipulations from time to time, like unless there is like a national emergency, like with the telegraph, an emergency telegraph could get precedence
of course
over. But like aside from that, like the I think the Telegraph Act of 1860, it actually states that like one message has no, like you cannot give one message any special privilege over another message. They have to be handled in the order they're received. Which, while they didn't call it net neutrality, that's exactly what net neutrality is.
Yeah.
And it's applied. The same thing happened with the telephone. The same thing as it was originally the internet. As much as Ajit Pai and all his lackeys like to say that like we've had there used to be like light touch regulation. The early internet was under a Title II infrastructure. Yeah. Most of it was, if not, all of it was on the old copper. Actually, I'll say most of it because there might be like a few instances of like, some homegrown, like whatever. But for the majority of it was all on AT&T's copper network.
And let's be clear. When you say AT&T, in this instance, you mean Ma Bell.
Ma Bell, yeah.
Like before the Baby Bells were broken up. Or before Ma Bell was broken up into the Baby Bells.
Yes.
Which eventually would become Verizon and what we now know as AT&T and so on.
Yeah. But, and it's so we've always had this concept of net neutrality. It wasn't until 2002 when cable came out. Well, really, cable was out before then, but there's always been a
cable internet.
Right. Well, what do we do with this? What is it? And because they've always looked at kind of cable as like a luxury and kind of all over one distribution mechanism, they considered it its own kind of consolidated entity, and they considered a cable internet system as something different. They called it an information service. Lo and behold, that kind of caused a problem within the internet space because you have one set of internet being regulated under an information service, which the FCC has a little power to regulate when it comes to net neutrality rules. Even though they've tried in the past to do this, the court always overturns it and says it's not a Title II entity, which is a telecommunication service, which is what the FCC has more power to regulate. In 2005, they basically took DSL and what would soon be fiber and also put it under
information service.
Yeah. And I think any type of mobile system went in 2007.
That sounds right.
But even after that, the FCC still stated principles of net neutrality. The courts always basically said what would happen is they try to instate some type of net neutrality rule. Verizon or Comcast or whoever would sue the FCC, and the courts would always decide in favor of telecom because they were misclassified, basically.
Right. And just to recenter us.
As Title I information service.
Right, yeah.
Right. So
just to recenter us in this discussion, right? Like everything we are talking about with regard to net neutrality has to do with the idea of ISPs and so on being allowed to throttle, like control the speed of information moving through the lines of the internet, right? Like, so the concern, and it's a legitimate concern, and there have been cases brought to court over it. It's not like a hypothetical.
Right. No, it's happening.
Like there was a case that was settled out of court with Netflix as one example.
Well, there's many examples.
Yeah,
though,
but I mean,
that's
the big one, right? Was it 2015? Is that
14.
right? 14. About like the ISPs throttling a competitor. And that is only, and I've pointed this out once before, that's only one, and I would say the least insidious concern that I have. Like,
paid prioritization scares me much more.
Yeah.
Because what paid...
You never see that.
Well, you can't yet. And actually, it's interesting.
No, I mean, you wouldn't see it except for in performance.
Well, they make a deal. Basically, currently, like, okay, say my website, gradreason.com. I buy hosting, and that host, within that hosting cost, is my access to the internet.
Yeah.
So I'm paying a fee to be able to be on the internet. Just like you pay a fee to get on the internet when you set up your...
It's user to user.
Exactly.
In some cases, the user is an individual. In other cases, it's a legal entity that is providing content.
So we're already paying to have access to this pipe. What paid prioritization does is creates a double charge.
Yep.
To basically say, oh, not only do you pay to get on, but if you pay X amount of money, you get to go first. You get
right. We won't slow you down.
Or we'll speed you up, or
whichever
whatever,
way you
which
want to
is
think of it.
irrelevant. They look at it the other way, so they don't have to say that they're throttling.
It's an extortion scheme,
right? So it's really just another charging mechanism.
Yeah,
and it's so funny because Comcast, when we originally had the net neutrality fight back in, I think, 2014 into 15. It went live in 15. Comcast actually put something on their website to where they pledge, because they're basically, it is PR, and they were essentially pledging that they would never ever throttle or actually, here it is. I just pulled it up. It's Comcast won't. This is what they used to have on there. Comcast won't block access to lawful content. Comcast won't throttle back the speed at which content comes to you. Comcast doesn't prioritize internet traffic or create paid fast lanes. Comcast Internet Essentials will make the internet more accessible to low-income families. Comcast will inspire innovation, promote learning, create access to jobs. Okay, that's what it used to say. And here's the funny thing is that was the promise from 2014 until April 26th, 2017 of this year. Do you know what happened on April 26th, 2017?
Do tell.
Ajit Pai announced the rules that he's going to vote on in 2 weeks. So the day that Ajit Pai goes and says that he's going to basically overturn net neutrality, all of a sudden, when you went to this page, Comcast's net neutrality promise changed. And it says this now. It says, we do not block, slow down, or discriminate against lawful content. We believe in full transparency in our customer policies. We are for sustainable and legal enforceable net neutrality protections for our customers. It doesn't say anything about paid prioritization anymore.
I'm not allowed to call people names. Not allowed.
That tells me that December 14th is going to come. They're going to vote on this thing, and you're immediately going to have a paid prioritization scheme on the internet.
Of course you will. Of course you will. You know why? Because companies, and I do not begrudge companies. I've said this before I'll say it again. I do not begrudge companies for trying to earn maximum profits for their shareholders, right? That is the point of having regulators, is so we can have the regulators say, hey, you know what, guys? I know that's the letter of the law, but that's not the spirit of the law, right? Like, and you smack their hands a little and it backs off and everybody goes about their merry way, right? But here's the problem. When you have something like the FCC as a regulator that is captured, that's the actual term,
right,
like industry capture, right, by an industry. Remember, former Verizon lawyer.
Yes.
Right?
Ajit
Pai, former Verizon lawyer.
Now, we can still use puns, I think. I think it's still okay to say, like, ISPs get their piece of the pie.
I
think
can tell you this.
Call. I think that's okay.
Literally, over Thanksgiving, every time I went and got pie, I was a little angry. Okay? And I ate a lot of pie. Sorry. So anyways, this is the whole point of having regulators, is so that kind of statement has to be maintained. Right? Like that kind of statement, the board at Comcast can't go tee and take it down, right? Like, and go and then do whatever the hell it is they want and charge people crazy amounts. Now, again, the charging and throttling and paid prioritization, I still kind of lump them together in one big category, which is basically like anti-competitive behavior.
It is.
I think there is another category that's even scarier.
Let me explain, because people might not understand like why paid prioritization is so bad. Because they might say, oh, well, you know, they're just paying for more access. But it's not. Look at Netflix right now. Netflix probably doesn't care too much about paid prioritization, because
they've legitimately stated on their earnings call they don't care,
because
they've got deep pockets.
Exactly. And what it will do is it will benefit incumbents.
Yeah, it chokes out the next Netflix.
Exactly. Like if Joel and I got off our ass and decided to put together some type of innovative service.
To be clear, we have more than one ass.
Asses, excuse me.
Thank you. We have multiple asses.
Yeah.
I can clarify. I can say ass.
One podcast, multiple asses.
Multiple asses. That's our motto.
Right. So, what the hell was I just saying?
If we decided to launch a competitor to Netflix.
If we decided to launch some kind of service that was going to compete with an incumbent like Netflix or whoever, Hulu, whatever.
It doesn't matter, right?
We would not be able to afford the same prioritization.
Yeah, you would have an additional cost drag.
Right.
That would be harder proportionally for a small company to manage than a large company.
And this kind of, I mean, it's the entry, the basically the fee for entry goes up.
We talked about poll fees.
Yes.
When we were talking about like the actual physical infrastructure layouts of the internet.
Yeah, like new ISPs, it's tough to get into the game right now because of, these like, well, it's getting better in some areas, and this isn't really a cost. It's more of it's a cost because it's a delay in time. Like you have to go through all of this. Hey, can I touch AT&T's poll? Kind of. That sounded kind of.
Yeah. Yikes.
Hey yo.
It got blue. When we say poll, now, so there's multiple ways to interpret that. One is the naughty way. The second is like often you hear about like a poll fee, right? Like poll tax, right? Like people think about,
but not like voting.
Voting,
right?
No. This is actually a physical fucking poll where a line, a line, like a communications line, a telephone line, or fiber optic cable is laid out, right?
Well, it's really what stops it though is there's regulations in place that say all companies that have wires on the pole have to sign off on
right. And that's my point is just to simply point out it's an actual pole.
Right.
right? Like it's a typically wooden pole.
Yes.
In the ground. And so like this idea that Dennis is laying out here of like, just more cost drag on smaller providers.
They want to start up, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's just that much harder. Yeah. So like Mr. Innovation, I mean Mr. Ajit Pai, when he lays out,
he needs to open his shirt up one day and just have like a Superman, but an eye. Like
sarcasm's still okay.
Just an eye.
I just can't curse
for
right?
innovation, which I'm going to get to because his innovation thing's complete bullshit.
Oh, of course it's complete bullshit. We've gone through the earnings and investment. It just drives me insane. Anyway, so like that's a big bugaboo like in the industry is this idea of like. If you allow the big three and really all of the ISPs to start charging smaller competitors, right, or all competitors, right, a fee for faster internet access, and I as an end user am going to judge a service based at least in large part on speed. Like imagine watching Netflix and it being dirt slow.
Yeah, you're going to blame Netflix.
You blame Netflix. You don't blame your ISP. Like no one has ever done that.
No.
And it should happen.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
I'm a bit of a nerd and I'll go check my speed.
Yeah. Well, I have a tendency. I unplug my I do. I'm not as network nerdy as you, but I go like help desk step 1 and 2.
Well, that's the thing.
I reset my router. And then
I was a Unix admin.
Yeah.
Like not everyone was. And no. I would guess that, 99 out of 100 people aren't going to go, if they see something is slow, they're not going to go and check like the pipes connection to make sure that it's not the internet connection. Well, they're going to assume that it's the product that they're using at the time.
It's the same idea as why am I pooing myself over anti-competitive behavior? I was an econ major and that's what I got my master's degree in, right? Like, so like I fret over this stuff because I studied it for a long time, right? Like, so I don't expect everybody to care about the nuances of this argument. Just more broadly, like net neutrality, though it's a regulation, this is what I would hope people generally get. Though it's a regulation, it actually prevents the very powerful companies that manage our access and the companies who we like to use, access to the internet. It gives them, if you revoke net neutrality, it gives them much more power.
Right.
Much more power.
Because here's the thing. With capitalism works when you have a free market.
Right.
Now, I'm going to ask you this out there. How many ISPs do you get to choose from?
Oh, well, this is clearly rhetorical.
Yeah, well,
because we all know the answer.
About 33% of the country will say 2. A large majority of the remaining will say I have 1, and then about 10 to 15% will say none, and they're probably listening to this at the library.
We fall into the lucky 33%.
Right. I mean, I'm sure there's areas too where we have 2. Might have like a satellite provider as well to throw in a third.
Yeah, technically, I think we could get 3, but the third is not really viable.
Right. So right there, I mean, that is a problematic market.
Yeah. there's
not a lot of if you only have one provider, there is no market.
No.
So
no. Hey, Mr. Innovation, let's lock the market down more. That's a great idea.
And this is where regulatory measures need to step in to ensure that these entrenched companies aren't running ramshod over its consumers.
Well, and that's why I brought up the Sherman Antitrust Act, not because it's like, timely, right? Like it happened, I think, in like 1875, right? But it's it's the classic.
It was a bit
example.
after that because it was Teddy, right? Teddy was turn of the century.
I don't think so.
Was it before then?
Yeah,
I thought it was Teddy Roosevelt.
I think it was during Reconstruction.
Oh, okay.
I'll look it up,
Okay.
but so
I just associate him with trust busting, and I just thought
he
that
was.
I know,
a
but I
trust
just
buster,
assumed
but-
it was around that
No,
time.
I think it was.
You know better than I do.
was
You went to
first.
school
Well,
for-
I'll look it up. But anyways, like it's kind of the one that people point to as the gold standard historically of going, hey, you know what? These companies have gotten a little too powerful.
Right. Well, the thing is though, because that's, I think, what they're pointing to is they're saying that Sherman can handle this when it comes to blocking and throttling and anti-competitive behavior.
Well, God, are we going to have to talk about the DOJ?
You
and
mentioned
FTC?
Sherman. All right, well, since you brought up Sherman, because that's like one of the favorite things, like when I go
real quick. Correction, 1890.
Oh, 1890.
Sherman Antitrust Act.
Okay. So it was in the middle
Yeah.
of what we thought. So, but it was still before Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes.
So, which you were correct on. With Sherman, a lot of the like the anti-net neutrality or pro repeal of Title II designation.
Right.
They want to say, oh, well, the FTC and Sherman will handle it all. I don't think so, for a number of reasons. First, if you have to prove, you have to set the market with any antitrust case. You have to say what the market is.
Not an easy thing to do.
It's not. And while there are areas where there's one legitimate source for broadband, like we said, there's satellite internet. There are less viable options that could come into play. So then they set the market. And it all depends on how that market is set. So it's kind of tenuous on what you're talking about in a given situation, on what the competitors are in that area.
Yeah, and let me interject real quick on that. Like, so what Dennis is saying is basically that like the ISPs will be arguing their pants off that every
cell phones,
every conceivable type of competitor to internet service and paid television that they provide, right? Like both of those services, that there is a myriad of other options, right? Like, because you've got all these satellites and the cell phone providers and et cetera. Like, and the reality of things is that, like, yeah, well, that's kind of true about like certain little edge bits, right? But most television and most internet access is consumed at home or at work.
Right.
And those are provided by a geographically constrained single ISP.
For the most part, yes.
For the most part.
So what's going to happen is they're going to have to prove that first, I think that because it's a two-pronged test. I think it's like Section 5, like FTC's regs.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Where you need to first prove that there is a monopoly.
Right.
And you have to prove that there is harm.
Yep.
There's ways around that.
Yeah.
For a lot of this. And what happens in an area where there isn't a legitimate monopoly and someone's throttling?
Yeah.
Like, you're basically saying it's okay to block content as long as you are in an area where there's another competitor.
Right. Where the
what if both competitors decide to block
could go by something else, right? Yeah, no, it's a very good point.
Right. I mean, there's too much that can go wrong. Second, the FTC doesn't have the expertise.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the network people. And McSweeney, like the former chairman of the FTC, said that she said that they depend on some sort of, like, they'll go to a sub-regulatory body.
Yep.
Like when it comes to, I don't know, cars.
Yep.
They'll go and talk to experts. I I can't remember off the top of my head like the regulatory body that covers.
Oh well, so an easy example is the FTC. So just so you know, because it's kind of like inside the Beltway baseball, Federal Trade Commission and the DOJ, Department of Justice, they kind of call the ball in the air most of the time on who will pursue antitrust, like, cases.
Right.
And most of the time it seems to go to the FTC, but a lot of time it goes to the DOJ. And they both like feed off of each other for expertise. And Dennis is correct. They go to other sister agencies throughout the executive branch.
But the rules, but what I'm saying, like they'll actually like the rules for what is anti-competitive behavior is usually decided by the sub-agency that regulates that area. They'll confer with the FTC and come to an MOU, which is, that
Memorandum of Understanding.
Yes. Between two agencies decide. Like,
did you like that?
Yeah, I know.
That was stuck way back here in the brain meat.
I just know MOU. I mean, I just... So the problem is there's not the expertise there.
Yeah. And it takes half a decade to build that.
To be honest, the FCC used to have a lot more expertise in this area, and they've dropped it over the years. Yeah. But I personally feel that the FCC, needs to beef up that part.
Sure, but they're still considerably.
They're going the other way right now.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. They're considerably more knowledgeable about the internet than the FTC would be.
Yeah.
So they're ill-equipped to handle it, and not to mention the Antitrust Act just doesn't handle all the concerns that you have on our situation with the internet. If the internet was operating in a competitive environment with multi-providers, sure, I'd be fine with it coming over to the FTC. But that's not the reality we live in. We live in a reality where you usually have one, if you're lucky, maybe two providers to choose from.
Right.
That's an environment where you need some outside the box regulations to ensure that everything is on the up and up.
Well, and again,
until things get better.
Yeah. When we get to the point where technologically non-terrestrial, meaning like lines that are either run over land or buried under land, once they become the norm, right? Like once satellite
or 5G,
which
is around the corner, but who knows how that's going to pan out? Or, I mean, are you going to be able to get 5G everywhere in the country? Probably not.
Probably not. No. But so once you get to that point where those non-terrestrial ways of consuming the internet become the norm, which you're still talking a ways away, right? Then this becomes less of a concern.
Right.
But and can I bring up one other concern before we move on?
Well, I'm not moving on.
Oh, okay.
I think
I'm ready to go.
More to go here.
All right. So
the powder is dry.
So I think I said this earlier where I put everything we've talked about with concerns so far in one bucket, which is anti-competitive behavior. Then I have like another bucket. And the other bucket is concerns about state power.
Oh, well, that's getting totally removed here because they actually announced that the federal regs will hold sway. Like they're getting rid of any state power to put in its own net neutrality rules.
Well, when I say state power, here's what I mean. Right? Like imagine how easy it would be now that the norm and frankly the rule, the law, right, that said throttling is just not acceptable, right? Like up till now or up till soon, throttling is not acceptable.
Right.
Imagine
and remember, it's been that way since
1860. Right. So, whatever. Right. Like throw caution to the wind. But so you remove that and you go, okay, the ability to control the flow of information is now consolidated into the hands of really 3 major companies, and a couple others, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, the federal government with a little bit of lean, can kind of make these companies give up information, throttle a certain thing that they're not liking, or what have you. But, I mean, we also got to remember that that's a broken system.
Sure.
And the problem, I think in this country, the problem we have right now is we kind of look at the government as not us.
Right.
And it needs to change because the government, I mean, look at the preamble of the Constitution. The first thing you say is we the people.
Right.
And that's, I think, what we got to remember and start getting back to is that these regulatory bodies, while you for some reason culturally we're sitting there and we look at those regulations as kind of like the enemy of innovation, as Ajit Pai says, or the enemy of like commerce. They're not.
No, they're meant to represent us.
Exactly. And that's what we have to get back to as a population and start to remember that, like, I think the problem is regulatory captures actually cause this problem.
Yeah.
It's because you've had companies lobby the regulators to kind of make favorable decisions towards companies. And the reason why that's happened is because we have not been involved enough as a population to stop it.
Well, I do feel, it's just a feeling, right? But I do feel like that is starting to change.
Recently. But
Very
recently. For years, though, it hasn't. I mean, people are...
Apathy is very powerful.
And that's the problem. The problem is us.
Yeah.
We get the leaders and the regulatory bodies we deserve.
No, that's exactly right. Like, in even when you look at it, I sound very concerned about state power or corporate power and so on. I am. But I recognize that corporations are just large groups of us with, contractual agreements and governments are basically the same idea. And I think where all of it breaks down is that we forget, like you said, that we the people, right? Like, give up the authority for these entities to act.
Right.
Right. 2, I think we forget that, capitalism is actually a pretty good check on power.
In a free market.
In a free market. And that's my point.
Right.
When I say capitalism, I'm shorthanding free market capitalism.
Right.
And so
well, that's the thing is I hear a lot of capitalists and libertarians going and saying, we don't need this net neutrality.
No, in fact, that's exactly the wrong argument.
Right. Because and that's what I'm
for
saying.
Everything we said before.
We are working in an anomaly when it comes to the internet space, the ISP space, because we do not have competition. We do not have a free market.
Well, we've had it a couple of times, right? This anomaly is not unprecedented.
Right.
But it is an anomaly. Yeah. Right?
And that's the problem that we're facing right now. This is not a normal case. This is not a normal industry.
There's a handful of industries where this is the case. And so you look at it, really, here's from an economics perspective, here's what really draws the distinction. Any industry where there is a very, very high startup cost, there is a very significant barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. So that means the railroads, the internet, right? Because the infrastructure to that, either one, they got claim to it because they were granted it by the government, which was partly the case. But 2, they also built out on it, which was very expensive, right? Like the ISPs did.
Well, that's why they declared AT&T a monopoly.
Right, exactly. So any industry where there is very, very heavy startup costs, You end up with significant barriers to entry. And because of that, it means it is naturally monopolistic or oligopolistic. And so it really begs for regulation in the sense of break them up, right? It's like you hear this refrain with banks all the time, right? Because capital, as you use, when I say capital in this sense, I mean like money, right? Like the classic sense of like a financial capital, right? When you have a great consolidation of it, and now you're allowed, or you have the ability to loan it out, right? You become a bank, right? Like you can loan out your money to draw interest off of it. Well, that allows you to consolidate more capital, right?
Right.
And so eventually you grow larger and larger and larger, and that's just natural. It's what happens in the system. So periodically, and it happened in, I'll just keep it to the last like 150 years.
Okay.
It happened in the 1890s. It happened in the late 1920s, right? It happened in the middle 80s with the savings and loans.
Yes.
And it's happening now, right? Like where people go break them up.
Right.
And the reason they're going break them up is because they've gotten very large, because that advantage.
But I think we've lost that insight because it happened in 2008. And we didn't say
simple insight.
We didn't yell break them up. We said give them some money to buy more of each other.
I did. I just didn't have a podcast.
Well, I know. That's the thing is.
I just kind of stood out on my roof and yelled break them up. You heard me.
But it gets back to the whole point of there's a huge sect of the society or the people that have tuned out and they're just not involved.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, if you look at our history, that's a more recent development.
Yeah.
In the past, 40,
I don't have a good explanation
30 or 40 years, maybe.
I don't have a good explanation for why that's happened.
But I mean, usually, which is odd, especially in the information age where it's just kind of at your fingertips. Maybe it's too easy.
Well,
I don't know.
So here's the thing.
Because in 2008 would be the perfect time for everyone to start screaming, break them up. And we didn't. We did the opposite.
Here's the thing about the information age, right? Like, here's the thing, right? That's right. I put the in quotes. This is the only thing about the information age. That's a joke, right?
It's one thing.
It's not a good joke. It's one thing. Is that the signal to noise ratio is all sorts of
That's
wonky.
true. It's the paradox of choice.
Right. When I say signal to noise, what I mean is that like there is information in the data, right? But there's so much data.
That's true. It's like you're getting hit with this fire hose of words.
Yeah.
Information. Like what's
Dennis,
real? What
Dennis
do I
and I,
to?
before we started this, we were talking about whatever, and Dennis got all riled up about like, and the goddamn news is talking about pumpkin lattes, 24 hours a day, right?
Pumpkin spice lattes.
That's exactly right. It's like, don't get me wrong, I like pumpkin spice lattes.
I think just
but
to
for
clarify,
God's sake.
To clarify, we were talking about how like maybe 10% of the population is really excited about pumpkin spice lattes.
Shit,
and
right?
if you are into pumpkin spice lattes,
it's a pretty nice
very, very
little,
fucking important.
It's a nice indulgence.
But
there's a huge tax bill, right?
Well, there's 90% of the population out there, in a wide swath of is that even a word? I don't know.
Swath, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Swath of America that it doesn't give two shits about pumpkin spice lattes.
No.
Yet if they turn on the news and Thanksgiving's rolling around, they're like, it's pumpkin spice latte time, and you have some like Joe Schmo making, maybe double minimum wage sitting there going, oh, fucking, they're talking about the fucking $5 coffees again. I mean, it's kind of disturbing.
Well, and so like,
but anyway,
that's kind of, no, I don't think that's that much of a digression. Like, that's kind of my point is that like, look, between the alerts that I get on my phone because I forgot to turn off the alerts on 2 of the 40 apps I have on my phone, right? And like the news feed that I actually read and the podcasts I listen to and like the occasional Facebook posts that I check out and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I still look at Pinterest because I'm an old lady. And, you take all those things and you add them up. That's a lot of goddamn information to consume in a day, right? And that's just me. And there are people that are far worse than I am. Like, I'm not even talking about television or radio, right? Like, so the idea that we as people can consume all of this gibberish and discern that, like, hey, wait a second, there's actually only 3 things that are like big news stories that matter right now. I'm picking the 3 that are top of my mind. There's a huge tax bill.
Right.
North Korea just launched a missile.
Another big missile.
That effectively means they can put an ICBM over on the east coast of the United States. Which I live on that coast, so I'm not so happy. And then, hey, net neutrality is going away.
And
let alone
pumpkin spice lattes.
So that's 4. Let alone I got like kids with birthdays coming up and fucking my taxes are due in not too long and I got work stuff and blah. Right? And that's what everyone in the
you're being
world is
bombarded.
dealing with,
Right.
Like,
so no wonder only
that's why
25-30% vote during the midterms.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's really kind of,
if anything, I am amazed. Think about, like, if you had that context in your mind, right? Like that, hey, I'm surprised anyone comments on anything that's actually like in the civic sphere.
Seriously.
Right? Like, I'm surprised. And the fact that like 10 million comments plus were laid down.
No, it's 22 million.
Holy shit.
We're going to get into it. We got some time here. I'm going to
that.
Okay.
Stop my blathering.
Well, first off, let's real quick, because Ajit Pai keeps slamming this whole innovation thing, and his whole point of saying that he needs to repeal Title II and get rid of net neutrality, because there's a lack of innovation, is due to basically the telecom data that says they're not investing as much, which, okay, if you can slice the data one way that says they're investing 1% more than they did before net neutrality, and you can slice the data another way that says they're investing like 1% less than they did. It's
margin of error stuff.
Exactly. But let's just pretend that, okay, fine, they're spending less. Who gives a fuck? Because you don't measure innovation on spend.
No.
You measure innovation on the results of the spend.
Right.
And Akami does that in the internet. There's a company called, Akamai.
Oh, I love Akamai.
I said Akami. I meant Akamai. Akamai does that. They basically measure the connectivity, basically how many people are on the internet, how fast the average
how much they're moving
is.
around,
in every single country on the globe. And the United States, if you want to look, net neutrality went into effect in early 2015. Now I have the first quarter results from 2017 and the first quarter results of 2016. In that time between 16 and 17, internet speeds average in America went up 22%. You go to the first quarter of 15, which is when they put the Title II rules in place, to the first quarter of 16, they went up 29%.
It's ridiculous.
If you look before net neutrality, and I'm not even saying that there is a causation here.
All you can point out is correlation.
I'm just saying there's just some data. This is just evidence of speed of the internet, which I think is a pretty good indicator of innovation.
Could I point out really quick while you're doing this is that Mr. Pai has not once, to my knowledge, produced any data to back up his assertions.
Not any data that wasn't like from telecom
spoon-fed
companies.
from the telecoms.
In quarter one 2014 to quarter one 2015, there was only a 13% increase. That's before net neutrality. So
it looks like a considerable increase.
Yeah, it's almost double. I mean,
yeah.
And then if you look at quarter one 13 to 14, there was a 15% increase. So you're talking about the mid to low teens prior to net neutrality. And then we're in the
low 20s.
Well, no, 22 and then 20, well, 29 and then 22.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
So right there just tells that's a better measure of innovation. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not even saying that Title II had anything to do with it. I'm just saying that innovation since 2015 has gone up.
Let me do this, because you said something earlier, which is spend does not equate to innovation. Totally true.
Right.
But let's go back and let's refute the argument that spend is down. Right? Oh, yeah. Because that's implied from his argument. Like, he's actually said they're not investing in innovation. That is the phraseology he has used. And so you have refuted the innovation element. Mm-hmm. I want to refute the investment. And I am tamping down hostility. I don't know if you could tell.
Don't say douche canoe.
I'm not saying any of it. Not. I'm going to have a boil on my neck by the time I walk out of here from not expressing myself. But, so we listened in on the earnings calls and, read all of the reports and stuff.
Right.
From Verizon, AT&T, and Charter.
Almost all of them.
Oh, and Comcast. And all of them have reported that earnings were going up, and their dividend is remaining stable or growing.
Right.
Right? If you are doing those things, right? And I think it was Verizon that was pointing out a 7% growth in its investment in its infrastructure.
Yeah.
And 7% on a capital stock.
And on one call,
large.
I can't remember the specific one, but one call they actually asked if they're concerned about net neutrality or Title II.
And they went, meh.
Nah, they essentially said, it's not really
we'll
a big
make
deal.
money either way.
Right. It's not a big deal.
As the guy wiped his nose with $1,000 bill, right?
Right. And okay, politics is a kabuki dance. Politics is theater. Politics is a lot of bullshit.
Listen to an earnings call. You know what's up.
That's what's going on in the company.
Right? And that's why I'm like, all this, isn't that quaint, right? Listen to an earnings call. Go watch what happens to dividend growth, right? Go watch what happens to earnings growth. And that tells you what, you can literally see it on a balance sheet, what a company thinks of its prospects, right? And all those companies are investing in their capital stock. Right? All of them are pouring money into their infrastructure. They are investing just fine right now.
Right. So, okay, we've talked about what net neutrality is, why it should remain, why Ajit Pai is screwing this up by repealing it. Let's talk about what's going to happen after. I think that this will have its day in court because there's already multiple lawsuits.
Yeah.
One of the lawsuits, and getting back to your comments statement, there were 22 million comments filed at the FCC on
about the proposed rule.
Yes, about getting rid of Title II and essentially net neutrality. There has been some extensive studies on these comments. And there's been multiple FOIA requests on bots.
FOIA.
Yeah,
Freedom of Information Act.
Exactly. There's been requests because here's the thing: 22 million comments went in. There's been a lot of studies done on the comments because many of them looked very suspicious. Yep. For instance, people found plenty of comments where there were some pro net neutrality repeal, so anti net neutrality comments written by dead people, lots of dead people. There were some just
which is either very suspicious or really scary.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the dead are rising.
Yeah, that ain't good.
They're not saying brains.
They're saying
pie.
Yeah.
I don't know. That could be working.
You're wearing your Walking Dead t-shirt right now. So I'm not real comfortable with this.
So there were a lot of FOIA requests to say, hey, show me the IP addresses associated here, with these comments, because I would like to figure out where they're coming from.
Yeah, which they're all logged. It shouldn't be a big deal.
Well, they've
I remember.
Well, I've worked at federal agencies before. In two capacities. I've been and I've actually worked as a government employee.
Yeah.
You don't ignore FOIA requests?
No, you do not.
The FCC has ignored a FOIA request. They have not complied.
I didn't know you could do that.
Well, you can't. That's why they're being sued. So we have FOIA requests going at the comment phase of a regulatory decision, which at the FCC is an important part of. So you could easily go to court and say that there has been, there hasn't
impropriety.
Yeah, or there hasn't been due diligence on the process. This is one angle of attack I'm sure will be used in courts when they sue the FCC over overturning net neutrality, because it's just been sloppy. Like, first off, they ignored FOIA requests. They said that there was a DDoS attack at the same time where a prominent television star, John Oliver, basically put a call to action on his show to support net neutrality. That same night, all of a sudden,
they lost the logs.
Their servers went down, and there was a massive denial of service attack on the FCC.
It's super convenient.
And they've showed no proof whatsoever that it even happened.
Which is actually really easy to prove.
Extremely easy to prove.
Right? Because all the traffic should come from at least a handful of IP.
Yes, yeah. You can see what's coming in, and either... But
there's a clear pattern.
Yes, and people have FOIA'd those as well. Give me the logs so we can figure out who did this, and they don't have them.
That's so convenient,
right? So there's a lot of shadiness going on around the whole process itself. Furthermore, somebody did some natural language processing, kind of analysis on all these comments. And what they've done is they found letters that were similar.
Right.
Basically, they kind of they used semantic analysis and found it's essentially the same letter minus a whole bunch of synonyms here or there, like Mad Libs. Picture Mad Libs where they just insert different words here or there.
Sure.
The largest block of the 22 million comments was 1.3 million for pro repeal. And they were definitely a mail merge where they've just swapped in here or there. That's definitely spam. And if you rank, he basically took them and put them into duplication categories, saying these are all the same because of semantic analysis.
Yeah, these are all definitively the same.
So if you rank them, you see that the pro repeal of net neutrality, they're all up in the top rankings for the most part. They're all clustered in the top 100. The long tail, the end, the remaining 300 or whatever groupings, those tend to be...
Those are natural language. Those are actually written by human beings.
No. Those are actually kind of because what happens is if you go to my site, I said, hey, you should say something like this. So somebody takes that language and they go, they put it in. I mean, and that's happened, but I'm just saying instead of a million people doing it, 1,000 people did it, and it was from different sites. So it's a different type of form letter that was used. Right. Those tend to be in the, hey, don't repeal this thing, keep net neutrality in place.
Okay.
Now, of the 22 million, only 1.52 were actually kind of completely unique.
Freeform. Well, mine, I could tell you, was completely unique.
Mine too.
Mine
but it wasn't because
many curse words.
People cribbed off.
Many curse words in mine.
But here's the funny part. Of the unique, 1.52 were pro net neutrality.
Yeah.
23,000 were anti.
Yeah, that should tell you something.
That's like 99% of the freeform unique letters were let's keep net neutrality.
Well, it's 99 point something. Yeah.
Well, it's like 98 point something because it's like 98? It's like 1.52 and 23,000, so it's probably like 98ish.
So
98.5, 98.6.
Here's the other thing that I think bears mentioning. You correct me.
That study?
Yeah.
This is the best part.
What?
Funded by the ISP lobby.
Jesus Christ.
They and here you go. I got to read this. The company was called Imprata, and Imprata said that it was contracted by Broadband for America which is an ISP, conglomerate, to perform an independent and unbiased analysis of the comment data received by the FCC.
Boy, that wasn't smart.
And Imprata itself, quote unquote, does not have a vested interest in whether Title II is repealed or not. Broadband for America provided a link to the study on its homepage. The statement on the group's homepage today did not mention the public's broadband opposition to repealing Title II net neutrality. They also said that the report by expert data analytics firm revealed unprecedented volume of clutter in its docket.
Yeah.
So basically the study found out that anyone who was a real person who submitted a comment was more than likely 99% to be in favor of net neutrality.
Right.
The remaining 1% against. Instead of actually saying that, Broadband for America decided to say, there was a lot of clutter in the comments.
Right.
Just to provide some kind of
I actually think that is a point. I just think that's like the fourth or fifth point you make about the analysis.
Exactly.
Right. The other thing, what I say about signal to noise ratio, right? You got all these bots, you got all this stuff, but something that I think is worth mentioning is that the previous record holder for the most comments ever received on an FCC proposed rule was the last time net neutrality came up. And I think it was at 5 million.
Yeah, like 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
This is 22 million. And if you assume, okay, fine, it's got a lot more junk in it.
There's a lot of action.
Cut it down a lot, right? It's still a hell of a lot of comments.
Yeah. And I will say, there are pro net neutrality groups, I'm sure that AstroTurf as well. But it just seems that there is some real grassroots support
sketchy, right,
in the comments for net neutrality. There isn't a lot at all when it comes to repealing it.
Yeah, so if you were a judge and you were looking at this and you say, okay, what's in the public interest, and you go, okay, based on what the data analysts are telling me, 90% of this stuff I can throw out as mostly garbage, right? That's form letters or bots or whatever, where I can't really tell the validity on it, but this 10% I can really tell, and it looks to be in the upper 90s, in favor one direction, right? I really struggle to understand why anyone would think the regulatory body wouldn't go in that direction.
Yeah. And that's what I think, and that's kind of where I'm going with this is once this thing goes to court, you're going to have, first you're going to have the comment analysis.
Yeah.
Which kind of shows
it's a big deal.
They didn't pay attention to it all.
So you can get them on process.
2, even if you don't buy that first argument, you can go with, you didn't really even investigate any of the problems in your process.
Which again, it's process argument.
Right. It is, but it's another angle to it.
Yeah.
So there's 2 arguments there. Then there is there's a law in the books that basically says, and we've mentioned this on the show before, if you are a executive, policy branch, you can't just arbitrarily kind of change policy based on a new administration. You actually have to show that you're doing things for a reason and they're not, quote unquote, arbitrary and capricious, or basically random and,
against the public interest.
Well, not only that, it's just like you need reason for why you're changing policy.
Right. And there's no reason that's been given.
Right. And Ajit Pai says innovation. And he justifies that on cost, which Joel's pointed out, if you look at the earnings call, isn't true. But even if it was, innovation is measured by results and by every result that we have seen, because not only are speeds going up, but actually more people are on the internet. Yeah. So,
and even if you're just talking, even if we just boiled it to where we're talking about like what we often talk about, paid television, which is going to be the last keep that the ISP is going to try and hold, right? They're going to try, because that pays a lot. That's a big revenue earner for them.
Yes.
That paid television piece. We're in a golden age of television. There are more good shows out there right now in this net neutrality friendly time period than I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Yes. Agreed.
So I don't know. I'm at a loss.
You know what? But even if we've proven that. Sure, you can say, because I had someone throw the comment at me. It's like, yeah, but what would have broadband speeds have been like if we didn't have it? And it's like, well, before we had Title II, as I said,
yeah,
they were in the teens.
You can see what the growth was.
After Title II, they're in the 22 to 29% range. And I'm not saying Title II is the reason. Right. I'm just saying that there is no lack of innovation.
Right. But this is the problem. I mean, again, this is an economics argument, right? Like, I'm sorry. I apologize, not very sincerely, to all those that would make that argument that I don't have a parallel Earth set up in like a laboratory where we can run the experiment on, net neutrality. We don't have that, right? What we can do is look at history.
Right.
And we can look at history and say, hey, when we didn't have these rules, we had lower growth. And when we did have these rules, we had higher growth.
Right. And
we're going to go with that.
I'll even say that it is quite possible that Title II may at some point be bad for innovation.
Right.
But reality hasn't proven that out yet.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to get rid of it.
Yeah, there's no intellectual argument that can be made. I cannot definitively say.
It's too early, Ajit Pai. You might want to wait a couple years. But right now, there's no evidence for what you want to do.
No.
And I'm sorry, what were you going to say? I interrupted.
I was just going to say there's just no... I cannot refute hypotheticals in social sciences, right? Like, it can't be done.
Right.
Right? Like, and again, it's because it's not a hard science. I can't run an experiment on it and disprove it. Someone figures that one out. Right? Like someone figures out how this is Earth prime and that's Earth subprime, or I shouldn't use that term.
Whole banking thing again. All right,
exactly.
If you're enjoying the show, subscribe. If you're on iTunes, pick up your phone, hit that subscribe button.
Love that.
If you can also leave a comment if you like the show.
Yeah.
Leave a comment.
If you don't like the show,
then why are you listening?
We have very thin skin.
If you have any comments or questions, you can always email Joel or I at podcasts, singular podcast, because there's only one. As opposed to the asses, which are
there's only
one. Two asses and one podcast.
One podcast.
Podcast at groundedreason.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Grounded Reason.
Yeah.
You can go to the Facebook page, which is Facebook / I think Grounded Reason as well.
Yeah, no, that's right.
That's right. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it, man.
Oh, you can go to the blog.
Oh, yeah. Good God.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of information out there on how to cut the cord and why a G5 is an evil little elf.
I thought we weren't doing that. Well, it's Christmas season.
It is the Christmas season.
You can say elf.
Right, because I like Merry Christmas. I am not waging my war on Christmas.
Merry Christmas, even to the evil elves.
So, the evil elf on the shelf.
The evil elf on the shelf.
Marks on a shark.
They all are fucking scary.
I wanted to invent a whole bunch of like offshoots. Marks on the shark. Marks on a shark. Like Karl Marx riding on a shark. He jumps off your shelf on Christmas morn and smashes the bourgeoisie. Okay. On that note, this is Dennis Restaro.
And this is Joel Reed.
Have a good one, everybody.
Take care.